Hi, and welcome to Faith, Hope, and Love During an Election. I'm so pleased today to have my friend and fellow Writing Guild member, Natasha Sistrunk Robinson, with us today. She's the author of 4 books. She is a leader who is the founder of Leadership Links, an organization we'll talk about in a few minutes. And she's a former Marine, and she has so much wisdom and life experience that I find fascinating. So I'm so honored that you're here today.
Glad to be here, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Well, I wanted to start actually, because I do love your story, with you just sharing a few things, which you do in your book, Sojourner's Truth. Um, but just kind of a little bit about your background and about sort of where you come from and what shaped you as an emerging leader and now as a leader in your field. But like, what were the different elements that came into play? Tell us about your background and where you went to college and so on.
Sure. I always start like I'm a Black girl from Orangeburg, South Carolina. So Orangeburg is a small rural town in South Carolina, about 45 minutes south of the state capital of Columbia. And it was a segregated town. What was also unique about it, though, is that it's a town that has two historically Black colleges and universities. So we had a public university and a private university. And so that means that education and excellence in that way was a part of the culture of the community. But also, just my family were very just loving, affirming, supportive. A lot of women, not because the men weren't around, we just birthed more women on both sides of my family. Um, and so I just really had a wonderful childhood in that I felt secure, safe, affirming my identity as a Black girl. And so that's kind of the foundation for me. The other thing is that my, my hometown kind of had a role in, the civil rights movement. And so when I think about, a lot of people may have heard of like the Freedom Rise or the sit-ins, and a lot of that stuff was happening kind of in the North Carolina, Greensboro areas where a lot of that jumped off. And so there was a massacre in my hometown around that same time. It was started by well, it wasn't started, it happened as a result of these students at the universities, the HBCUs, being, um, you know, peaceful protesting because there was a bowling alley that was still illegally segregated. And there was not another bowling alley within 20-mile radius of that area. And so they were just protesting for their right to bowl. And so that started out with the college and university students, and then some students from my high school, which was the only public high school in town, started participating as well. And so these were, young people, kids, 17, 18-year-old children. And 3 boys were murdered as a result of that. And I remember when I was reading about the massacre myself, that there was a Black woman who was a college student at South Carolina State college at the time. And she was married and she was pregnant. She got beat by the police. And then a week later, she lost her baby. She miscarried. And so, you know, a lot of these things we're seeing now, these are things that I grew up with. And I didn't realize at the time that those things were really subconsciously at work in me, talking about how I felt about, leadership and equity and fighting for justice and those type things. And it was just kind of always a part of my being, because as a child, these were stories and a history that I had been born into already.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I left there. I left that place as a leader. I was kind of leading all the things. I was a competitive athlete, and I was smart. And so my parents, they didn't have a lot of money. They told me when I was in 6th grade, they were saying, "Oh, Tasha, we think you are, smart. We think we would love for you to go to college. We don't have the money to pay for it. You're gonna have to figure that out." And I said, "Okay," and I did. And so I worked really hard for the next 6 years to do that. So I got accepted in several colleges. I received full rides to several colleges. Ended up going to the Naval Academy because I came from a patriotic family. So my mother served in the Army. Her brother did a career in the Army. Her father was a World War II vet. Several of my cousins on my dad's side were going into the military at the same time. And so I did come from a patriotic family, but additionally to that, I was the oldest of three children. I didn't want my parents to worry about me. I wanted to be able to take care of myself. I wanted to get myself off their books. And so, in addition to the opportunity to serve, the Naval Academy offered me and a great education and a free ride, which was all prerequisites. The Naval Academy was actually going to pay me to go to school, and then they were going to offer me a career, which I thought was really good because I knew a lot of college graduates that didn't have jobs, and I didn't want that to be my reality as well. And so I went to the Naval Academy, graduated from there, served 6 years as an officer in the Marine Corps. Spent another 3 after that at the Department of Homeland Security. When I was there, God was kind of leading me to write and minister. Ended up going to Gordon Conwell, and then started writing and doing ministry mostly full time after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you're such a beautiful writer, but I was going to point out that you were an English major, right? So, I mean, you put in the study for that as well. So
Yeah.
you bring that sort of sensitivity to language and knowledge of literature as a whole to your own writing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, it's funny. I thought I was going to be an engineer going to school because uh, the way I grew up, it's like, oh, if you're smart, you become a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be a doctor. I didn't really know what engineers did, but I thought it was the cool thing to do or say. I got to the Naval Academy. I realized that, oh, this is hard. And so I remember saying, and so it's interesting. I don't have a bachelor's of arts degree. I have a bachelor's of science degree in English because everyone at the Naval Academy is required to take the same kind of core curriculum, which is very much STEM focused. And so, as an English major, I took calculus 3, I took physics, I took chemistry, I took electrical engineering, those type of things. But when I got to a point this saying, declare your major, I was like, well, I know I can read and write. I'm trying to graduate. Let me do that. And so after I took all those hard classes, I spent the rest of the time really honing the craft of writing, which also requires, as you know, when you read well, you write well. But I think it also helps kind of form critical thought and thinking. And so I think that's another thing that we have lost in our society and our education, which makes for adults that are not always as thoughtful and have as much depth in their conversation and choices. So I think all those things end up kind of working together for me. The way that my education was offered in college specifically.
Mm-hmm. It does feel like all the different parts of you and the gifts you have now, when I think about Leadership Links, and I wanted to talk about that organization, which congratulations, just celebrated 5 years, right?
Yes, yes.
But it does feel like sometimes when you look at a person's career and their sort of life journey, it does feel like each thing has been carefully kind of put together like a puzzle, and it seems like your background, your own skills, your leadership skills, you know, your life experience, it's all now that puzzle seems like you can see what the picture is in a way,
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
let's
it's
talk
real.
about Leadership Links.
Yeah, I think with Leadership Links, the beautiful thing about it is it kind of started out as, community and a community of people that were, shared values and really just praying and dreaming together. And so when we started doing that, I know we didn't think that we were going to have a nonprofit, but Leadership Links Incorporated, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, I started with 5 other Naval Academy graduates. They're all African American, all Jesus
I
loving
didn't know they were
people.
all Naval Academy graduates.
All African American, all Naval Academy graduates, all Jesus loving people.
Hmm.
And so the things that we did, like for the first 3 years we were together before we even incorporated, we really were talking about, excuse me, what are some things that that brought us together, and what could we do together and have a greater impact collectively than we could doing things individually. And so, those things were our Christian faith, education, leadership, mentorship, and public service. And so, obviously, all of us haven't served in the military, but beyond that, are very generous in the work that we do for our community and schools and philanthropy and all those things. All of us were already doing those things in our personal life, and so saying, how can we have a greater impact for those things? And so that's what kind of brought us together. And so the catalyst of Leadership Links, the mission for us is really providing leadership education holistically, that we say facilitates impactful living, character, and spiritual development. So we're looking to develop leaders holistically. We're looking to make long-term investment in those leaders. So it's not just about, events and programming. It's about, okay, now how can we journey through life with these people? And LINK stands for our core values of love, inspiration, network, knowledge, and service. And so we started most of our programming with middle and high school girls. It's not exclusive, but we basically have an organization, and we're also building a network. And that network is intentionally intergenerational, and it's also multi-ethnic. But most of the girls in our programming, middle and high school girls starting at 6th grade, most of them are African American. And so we're kind of starting there and specifically preparing them for leadership through what we call innovation, entrepreneurship, and executive leadership. Because I feel like Christians, we do a better job, particularly with our seminaries, preparing like pastors and lay people for work, but we do a very poor job of intentionally preparing people to lead in the marketplace, which is where most Christians are spending their time. And so our work really prepares these young people to go out and lead in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. And how many people have you worked with in this program over the years?
Yeah, so right now at our count through particularly our summer program and our mentoring program, we're looking at about 72 young people. But then that's not counting, our college events and some other events that we've done. It's not counting our online virtual events that we've done. We just did um, a book discussion over the summer, a book discussion series over the summer. So we did a conversation about Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, and then my book, A Sojourner's Truth, shaping those conversations specifically around leadership, culture, and racial issues, I would say. And, the last I checked on Facebook, we've had 3,000 people look at that series. So those are available on our Facebook page, but also on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And we will put the links up as well so that people can follow up and watch those things too. That's awesome.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So this series, is faith, hope, and love during an election. What brings you hope? I mean, I'm assuming that seeing the young people that you work with really thrive and flourish is one thing that brings you hope. But what else is bringing you hope right now, if anything?
Yeah, the young people for sure, and I'll say not just hope, but particularly joy, right? Because I love when I can see them thrive in the midst of what certainly feels like a wilderness. It brings a lot of joy, and so that is true. But I just think like, reading God's word, like God has been faithful. Um, God is faithful. And that does not mean that life will be easy, and does not mean that, we kind of shrug our shoulders. It's not pacifying people by any stretch of the imagination. But what I mean is that when I look out and I see a lot of darkness, and there is darkness, that I'm reminded that uh, there's a power at work in the world, the Holy Spirit, that is greater than the darkness that's trying to overtake us and people in the world. And the word tells me that. And so I have to hold fast to that. And so that's that. But also, Jennifer, I just have to, there are things that we have control over and the things we don't have control over. What I have responsibility and control over in is how I care for my own mind, body, spirit. And I'm pretty intentional about those things, so that I can continue to work, and be focused, and to your point, I guess, right, and be creative. And I can't do that if I'm constantly consuming, and I can't do it if I'm constantly filling my vessel, that my mind and my spirit, with negativity and trash.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not, on the news that much. I'm not on social media that much. It's just very toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just can't do those things, because I don't think that's going to bear the fruit that I want in my life.
Mm-hmm. That's a good reminder. It really is. I just recently, I don't know if you've seen this movie. It's kind of trending right now, I guess, but The Social Dilemma. I
Oh
don't know.
no.
Actually, you're probably one person I know who doesn't need to watch it, but it's about the how social media affects us and how it actually one big theme in the movie is that um, things like Facebook and Twitter and so on and Instagram and all those things have really created sort of bubbles so that, you know, we look at someone who has really different political views than we have and think, oh my goodness, how can you, you know, here's all the evidence. How can you look at the same world that I'm looking at and come to these conclusions? And the point that's made in that movie is actually we're not looking at the same world. All the news and all the people and all the voices that we hear, we've kind of had curated for us. And so I see a very different thing than a person with very different views than I have. And so that's,
Mhm.
you know, we're just kind of separated. Whereas, you know, when I was growing up, you know, there was like, you know, the three television channels, you know, CBS, ABC, NBC, and, you
Mhm.
know, 6 o'clock news was basically the same stories told by, you know, read by different people, right? But
Right.
we'd hear the same information and then be able to, you know, interpret it or come to conclusions about it. But now we're all, you know, there's this huge divide, and some of us are hearing this information and some of us are hearing this, and each thinks the other is completely wrong and completely off base. And so it's a disturbing movie, but the reason why I say you don't probably need to watch it as much as most of us is that I know that you're really intentional about not spending time online and about keeping focused. And I really admire that. I think that's a good, good reminder.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm excited to learn that you're working on a new book as well. And sort of
Yeah.
fitting with what we're talking about, it's on Exodus, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I wrote Sojourner's Truth a few years ago, I was telling my story alongside Moses and the Exodus narrative. And so I did a lot of study, you know, reading of the first five books of the Bible, the Torah, the Pentateuch, depending on, you know, what community you're in. But I spent a lot of studying in that. And so, you know, a lot of that study didn't make it into the book because basically I was lining up stories from my life, some parallels between my life and Moses' life. So the beautiful thing about writing that project and the hard thing about writing those projects is that it gave me a chance to share um, those two narratives in light of the African American experience in America. And I think in light of a bigger spiritual story of God's redemptive story. And so that was really, you know, it was hard, but also I think timely to do, and especially even now when we talk about, you know, like stories that people hear and narratives that we tell. I think, you know, one of the best things we can do for ourselves and each other is hearing other people's story and seeing how they navigate through life and how not just they see life, but how the world views them, right? And so I think I was able to do that with a great deal of integrity in that last book. But the point is, I had a lot of quote unquote homework that didn't make it into that book. And so I always thought I would probably write a Bible study on Exodus. And so when we got this whole pandemic situation, everybody got at home. I wasn't traveling as much. So I can focus and prioritize, you know, this project, and primarily because, you know, I think people are going to need it, right? I think, you know, when we first found out about it, people were like, oh, this will be something we'll be over in a while. But I think we understand, like, we're not going to be over it in a while. We're going to be home, or we're going to be adjusting to whatever this new normal is. And for some people, obviously, it's affecting different people in different ways. But for a lot of people, I know it very much feels like a wilderness. It very much feels like a dark place. It very much feels like a place of uncertainty. And so I believe that this project, like, you know, the others I've written, will be a blessing for the church. And so I'm excited to work on that, hopefully finish it by the end of the year, so it can get out to people maybe sometime next year.
That'll be a perfect timing, really, right? With as people are sort of you know, rubbing their eyes and as you say, looking around and trying to figure out what is the new normal that we're living in. Because I think you're right. I think, you know, I hear people saying, "Oh, I can't wait till everything's back to normal," and I think what's that normal that we want to go to? But also, I don't think we will. I think you're right. There's going to be a different normal that we can't even necessarily anticipate. Yeah, yeah. that's very true.
And what is God, specifically as people of faith, like what is God trying to teach us in this time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because for the 40 years they were there, like I pray, I don't think we're going to be here 30, 40 years, but I think I don't think 10 years of recalibrating is unreasonable given the current situation. And so in that time we can spend that time complaining and fussing and bemoaning about what we don't have or what things we're not allowed to do, or we can really be intentional in inclining our ear to see what God is saying. And specifically as a church, right? Because I think, the church has, we've gotten off track in a lot of things. And so, I think God is really causing us to wake up in a lot of ways and to be the people that God has called us to be. It's purpose and intention for us to be. And so I'm hoping and praying that this time will be a time, not of us just kind of circling the wagons, and dying in our foolishness, but really a time where God is raising us to be shepherds, and warriors. And I don't mean violence, I mean spiritual warriors, in a time that we can come out, not thinking about how we can go back to the old way, but we can come out better, more refined as God's people, living on mission for God's purpose.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, I think that's a wonderful last word for this talk today, because yeah, I mean that brings hope, faith, hope, and love to the conversation. So, is there anything else you want to share before we end today? Just any parting thoughts to the people listening, or things we can do to support you in your work?
Yeah, so I would just say for some of the stuff that's already out there, I think you're going to share. If people want to find me, you can connect on my website, natashasrobinson.com. But also for people who like to listen more than they read, I have a Sojourner's Truth podcast out that's available on iTunes and on Spotify. And so the first season of that is really a discussion for that Sojourner's Truth book I was talking about, but it's a good conversation about like wilderness experiences too. And what I love about that series in particular is that it featured all Black women. And so I think Black women do have some things to teach us in this hour because we've been through this before.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, excellent. So I encourage everyone to listen to Natasha's podcast and to find her online. And thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure to see you and to be able to hear your thoughts. I love your idea about seeing what God is teaching us and hoping that in this next chapter of life, whatever it looks like, that we'll be stronger and that we'll have, I think we certainly will, I hope, have more resilience and tools for dealing honestly with what's around us. So yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.